Betsy, let me start with you and the new cooperation that we're learning about from the committee and the Department of Justice on this issue of transcripts. The Department of Justice seemed pretty adamant that they, in fact, needed them. And now the New York Times reports that the committee will start sharing those in July. Give us the background here and why the committee still wants to wait until the hearings are over to share what they have learned in these transcripts.
Committees in general are always loath to share their own internal investigative materials with other outside parties, whether those parties are journalists or law enforcement officials, as long as their investigations are underway, because they don't want the integrity of those investigations to potentially be compromised. So it's understandable that the committee wouldn't necessarily be champing at the bit to send all these transcripts over to the Justice Department. Additionally, one process that's still underway between the committee and witnesses, which is very typical of congressional investigations, is the review process, where witnesses have a chance to come in, look at the transcripts of the interviews that they've provided to the committee and potentially add more information or make changes or amplifications to what they've said. That, again, is a fairly standard investigative process, and it's something that likely will be ongoing throughout the duration of the summer until the committee ultimately releases its investigation. If the committee starts forking over these transcripts to the Justice Department before that process is done, it could undermine the trust relationships that committee investigators have with the witnesses who've cooperated, many of whom, of course, have cooperated voluntarily. That said, for the Justice Department, when it comes to these prosecutions, sometimes there are time-sensitive decisions, upcoming trials, upcoming hearings, where having as much information as possible, as quickly as possible, would be helpful. And that seems to be an important piece of the reason the Justice Department is trying to put more pressure on the Select Committee to quickly get them this information that they're looking for.
So, Phil, I want to ask you, given that information that Betsy just shared, with that in mind, I want to show you two things, actually, and then I'll get your reaction to it. The first is this soundbite from Chairman Benny Thompson just yesterday when he was asked about whether or not the committee planned on cooperating with the Department of Justice. Watch.
So you're not going to turn over the transcripts by the end of the week?
No.
What's your reaction, Mr. Chairman? What's your reaction when they say?
Look, that does not mean that we're not going to cooperate. We got the letter yesterday. We've interviewed over 1,000 witnesses. We've had a number of information. That means we'd have to stop what we're doing to then work with the Department of Justice. We will eventually cooperate with them. We have 5 more hearings to work through. We have a lot of other things to do.
So you won't share it with them before the hearings are over? You won't share any transcripts with them before the end of the hearings?
No.
I think we're done, everybody.
No.
All right, so now compare that to a statement released just this afternoon from committee spokesman Tim Mulvey, in which the statement read, the Select Committee is engaged in a cooperative process to address the needs of the Department of Justice. We are not inclined to share the details of that publicly. We believe accountability is important and won't be an obstacle to the department's prosecutions. So yesterday it was essentially, we'll get back to you. We have work to do. Today, my reading of that statement suggests the committee has gotten back to DOJ. And you know Washington better than I do. Is this a course reversal here? Is this a course correction? Is this another instance of a member of the committee making a pronouncement one day only to undergo a change of heart a day later?
I don't read it as a correction or a course reversal. It seems more like an evolution in the negotiations over this cooperation. I mean, clearly the committee has a lot of work on its hands in the immediate term to prepare for these hearings next week, to continue their investigation and deal with what's coming out sort of day by day as these hearings are ongoing. And I read that statement today as just an indication that the committee is indeed talking to the Department of Justice about some sort of a timeline of when to share those transcripts and what that full cooperation could ultimately look like. But as the committee spokesman said, they seem to be loath to share those details with the public, but I don't see it as a reversal of what the chairman said to the reporters yesterday.
So, Chuck, I want to go back to that assessment we brought up at the top of the hour. Politico suggesting that the January 6th committee hasn't officially asked DOJ to investigate Donald Trump, but that it is still making that case in its own way. From that piece, quote, for all of the panel's public quibbling over whether to vote on referring Trump to the Justice Department for a possible criminal case, members did it their own way. They used Thursday's public hearing to present what they see as some of their most compelling evidence and thereby mount a case with Attorney General Merrick Garland. Watching that Trump broke the law in his effort to make former Vice President Mike Pence single-handedly overturn the election. Chuck, do you see it that way, that it doesn't really matter whether or not the committee makes the gesture of making an official referral? They have done it in their own way?
Well, they have done it in their own way, but I would change the question a little bit, Eamon, if you don't mind.
Please.
If the committee were to make a referral, I think that would be a significant mistake, right? The Department of Justice, and I worked there for many years, prides itself on being independent and apolitical. And if they were to get a mostly partisan referral from the House of Representatives, it would look like if they opened an investigation or charged someone as a result, they were doing the political bidding of the House. And that would be a huge mistake. So the House can characterize this however it wants. They want to call it, sort of a referral, quasi-referral, a referral in kind. Great. It doesn't matter. The Department of Justice has its own investigation. They could use some help from the committee, and I cannot imagine why the committee wouldn't be doing that expeditiously, because there are ongoing prosecutions where what witnesses said to the committee might be important to the constitutional and statutory obligations of prosecutors to turn certain materials over. Betsy explained it perfectly, but I think the committee is being small-minded and making a huge mistake in not immediately cooperating. Separately, Eamon, the Department of Justice has its own investigation. They are watching closely. Why wouldn't they? And it makes perfect sense to me that they would ask for materials from the committee again and again and again until they get it. And they don't need a referral, and frankly, I think wouldn't want one.
Let me ask you this, Chuck, if I can just modify that question then. You focus so much on intent during these hearings. The committee is doing its best to show that Donald Trump knew what he was doing was illegal because he had been told as such either by advisors that the election was not stolen, there was no fraud. They kept repeating it to him. The committee has a much lower bar than a courtroom, but have you, as a former prosecutor, have you seen what you need to see to be convinced that, in fact, Donald Trump knew what he was asking of Mike Pence and what he was doing by pushing this big lie was illegal?
Simply, I think they're getting closer to that important question, right? But let me tell you why I don't think they're there yet, Eamon. There's a difference between what Trump was told and what the Department of Justice can prove Trump knew. Let me give you an example. If you, Eamon, told me your favorite flavor of ice cream was vanilla, and people witnessed that conversation, we could prove that you told me that, and you could assume that I understand that, because that's not really complicated. If you spent the next week telling me about quantum mechanics and quantum physics, right, we would have proof that you told me that, but I don't think you would have proof that I understood it. We spend so much time talking about how ignorant President Trump is, and now all of a sudden, simply because he was told about the Electoral Count Act of 1887 and because he was told about the plain language of the 12th Amendment, I don't know that we can impute to him that he understood it. He doesn't understand very much. So far, I have good evidence in front of me that he was told. I have an inference that he understands. As a prosecutor, I would want dispositive proof that he understood and formed intent to do what he did. And I don't think they're there yet, but I think they're getting closer.
So, Claire, to that point, if I can expand on it with one of the most explosive bits of evidence yesterday, John Eastman, that email that he sent suggesting in part, quote, I've decided that I should be on the pardon list if that is still in the works. So, as we were just talking about intent there with Chuck and what Trump may or may not have known, how do you interpret that email from John Eastman? Because clearly he wanted to be pardoned for something he must have known was illegal if he's seeking a pardon.
Yeah, yesterday was brutal for John Eastman, just brutal. Not only did he know that the legal theory that he was pushing would lose in the Supreme Court 9-0, even though he wanted to hang on to Clarence Thomas, his buddy. And then, knowing it was illegal, he, of course, wanted to be on the pardon list. It is brutal. And I'm going to disagree slightly with my fellow prosecutor, Chuck Rosenberg. Maybe this is the difference between somebody who spent a lot of time in a state courtroom versus a federal courtroom. But I think they're there. I think they have a body of evidence that shows multiple ways that there was illegal activity by the White House directed by Donald Trump, whether it was him calling Pence that morning after he knew, and him lying in a tweet that Pence agreed with him, that he had the authority to do it. I mean, that shows intent, that lie. And we now know he dictated that tweet, that Pence agreed with him that he had the authority to do it after he knew full well Pence did not agree with him. And he had a conversation with the vice president of the United States. So on that score, I think we're getting close. I agree with Chuck, however, that there's no reason not to cooperate with the federal government in giving them evidence. I question why the federal government doesn't have more of this evidence themselves.
Right.
Why have they taken so long? Why have they not interviewed all these witnesses? And by the way, this is a role reversal. Usually the feds have all the evidence and they won't give it to anybody, including state and local prosecutors. In this instance, Congress has a lot of evidence and they are dragging their feet, giving it to the feds. They ought to give it to them as quickly as they can, even if they have to assign someone full-time on the committee to cooperate, because ultimately the goal here is prosecution. And finally, let me get this in. We in the media keep talking like Congress has some authority to make a referral. They have none. There is nothing in the law. It is them writing a letter. They have no more authority to give special attention to the Department of Justice to pursue a prosecution than anybody else does. So the idea that this referral holds some kind of weight is nonsense. And Chuck's right. They shouldn't do anything. They should present the evidence, share it with the feds, and then let the court do its job.